in 5, 4, 3.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Bristol Schools Forum. We've got quite a packed agenda tonight, so hopefully you've all received the papers in advance. Just welcome to all of you. There are a few new faces on Forum, so welcome to those of you who are new and who've just joined. Just as a reminder, this is streamed live, so please do make sure your microphones are off, cameras on, please, that would be great. And then we're going to run through a process for chair and vice chair, but when we go through each section, there'll be opportunities for questions at the end. And just as a reminder, the chat function is available. However, we don't use it because it can't be seen by people who are viewing from the Zoom channel. All right. Okay, from the YouTube channel. Okay, so the first item is to run the process for the election of chair and vice chair. So I'm going to hand over to Karina, who's going to take us through that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so we have had one nomination, and that is Sarah Lovell. I haven't received any others. So are people happy to go ahead and vote? So could everyone vote in favour of Sarah being chair? Oh, I should say as well that it is actually for a 2-year period, not just to the end of the academic year, if people are happy with that. So can I see hands of people in favour? Great. Anyone against? No? Okay, thank you. That's carried. So I'll hand back over to Sarah.
Thanks very much, Karina. I know I've been acting as vice chair for quite a while, so I thought, why not? Let's just go for the chair, and hopefully I will do you all justice. So the next process is vice chair. So effectively we would elect a vice chair to support myself and the officers in managing the agenda, deputising for me when I'm not available if my internet goes down, as was the case at the last meeting, and be able to take over as chair. So is there anybody who would like to propose to take on the role of vice chair? Anyone want to put their hand up? Okay, I think that's one that we'll work on then. I'll share a bit more detail around what that looks like in terms of the role of the vice chair. And then hopefully somebody will see it and be really excited and look at that as a new opportunity to get involved in a number of different things. So I'll share that in due course.
Sarah, I'm happy to do it, but in the area of balance, whether it's better to have someone from the maintained sector rather than having an academy dominated one, but so I'll leave it to now, but I'm happy to do it as a backfill if necessary.
Thank you, Simon. Really appreciate that. Yes, I'm very conscious that I represent secondary academies, so having that balance between maintained and academies might be helpful. But thank you for supporting in the interim, but we'll take that one away as well. Thanks very much. Okay, right then. So the next item is forum standing business. I haven't been made aware of any urgent items. So Karina, you normally take us through some of the apologies and vacancies, etc., please.
Yeah, thank you. So apologies from Rebecca Watkin, Rob Davis, David Otlet and Tracy Jones. The meeting is quorate. There are no resignations or new members to report, although this is Cameron Shaw's first meeting since being elected. Welcome, Cameron. Vacancies as on the agenda, that's 2 Academy Secondary Governor Reps, an Academy Primary Governor Rep, a Prue Governor Rep and Clifton Diocese. And can I just ask if there's any declarations of interest? No, okay, thank you, Sarah.
Great, thanks very much, Karina. And we'll take, we're always obviously advertising for the vacancies, so we'll bring you up to speed in terms of what action we've taken in relation to doing that at the next meeting. So in terms of minutes from our last one, which was just before Christmas, were there any, rather than going through page by page, were there any matters or any clarification or any feedback in relation to the minutes that you wanted to raise? Okay, so I can assume that we're all happy with the minutes.
Hi, Sarah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Chris, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I couldn't get the button there. Right, it was to do with regard to dedelegation, and there were some items just to be clarified on that on page 8. It was with the first one with regard to the free school meal eligibility. I raised the question with regards to was the eligibility checked on a regular basis, i.e. each week? And I think Alison was going to come back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a few actions I was going to go through, Chris. It was
okay. Sorry.
This was just more about the accuracy of the minutes.
Okay.
But I'll definitely. Should we pick that one up now, then, Alison? Please.
You want me to do that? Yeah. So the free school meal eligibility is not collected on a weekly basis. As a local authority, we collect it 3 times a year as part of that census. And the reason it's not collected on a weekly basis is because of the protection around the 2018 change with the universal credit. So basically, if a child was on free school meals in 2018, that's protected for a period of time. So that function isn't done on a weekly basis. I think it used to be, according to colleagues, but it isn't required going at the moment until that universal credit protection changes. So it's basically the checks are done locally with schools, and then we collect it, as I say, 3 times a year as part of that census.
No, sorry, perhaps I misled you in the thing that I was asking. Is when we submit a free school meal application on behalf of a parent, or a parent submits it, it used to be that they were checked, their eligibility was checked with the relevant database on a weekly basis. So if their circumstances changed, it would then flag up that child was eligible for a free school meal. Now, that software is freely available to purchase outside. It's too big for a small school to purchase. But I know bigger schools who've purchased it and are reaping the rewards in the fact that automatically gets checked on a weekly basis, and then we'll flag it up to the school to say, family A is now eligible, and we're able to then obviously make sure that they get their free school meal eligibility. It's not about capturing it at the census, it's capturing it at the root database. Because as I say, there are software packages out there, and I've purchased it on a 3-month basis previously, and it will run it, say, every week, and it will flag up those people that are eligible. Whereas the current system, we get somebody, if we do it on their behalf, we'll put it in the system, it's not eligible today, that's the end of it. And I think pupils in Bristol are significantly missing out on potentially being eligible for free school meals because that check isn't being done on a weekly basis.
By the individual school? Is that through the system? Through the system. Through the system.
So yeah. if you purchase a piece of software, you just put that pupil's name, details in it, and it will run that every week, forever and a day. Whereas at the moment, with the system, I believe is the case, we put it on the system, it gets checked once and once only, unless the school puts it in again. Which obviously, if you've got a number of parents, that is time consuming to put it in on a regular basis when there's an automated system that can easily do this and is readily available.
I think what would be quite useful, Chris, if you're happy, if you and I have a conversation out of this meeting, I might ask a couple of officers to join me for that. I'd really be quite keen to understand what this software is and how that would be really useful, if that's all right, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Good suggestion.
We'll talk back at the next meeting, but I'd like to understand it in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we approved the accuracy of the minutes. So then just going through some of the actions. There's an action in relation to the written statement of action, Alison, in relation to RAG rating at the next meeting.
Yeah, and the monitoring visit. Did that get to you, Karina? I'm not sure I've seen it come out in the circulation, so I'll chase that and we'll make sure that's circulated. So it's on the local offer, but we'll make sure that it's the link is sent to this group.
Right. Thank you very much, and we'll make sure we include the RAG rating in the next physical report that we receive. Great, thank you. And then we've got the items around the dedelegation, which I know will be picked up later on in the agenda. We've gone through the free school meals. section. So I think the next item that we're going to go to is the verbal update from yourself, Alison. So over to you.
Sorry, just working through the different pages. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And good to see so many of you. I wasn't quite sure how many of you will be able to join this meeting, because obviously we've had quite a pressurised start to the new year across the education sector nationally, and Bristol is no different. So I really do. I managed to catch up with a couple of you before we started the meeting. So I really do hope your teams and yourselves are keeping well and coping with the demands that we're all facing across the system. I talked to you last time in the meeting about the high-level proposal for phase 3 of the education transformation plan, and I wanted to just really come back round to that a little bit in this update, and think about how we go from where we are now with the planning to be able to start rolling that out in real time for April, bearing in mind the timing of the next schools forum. So you obviously took the decision to transfer that 0.5%, and obviously that will be finalised and formalised tonight. But we've been doing some further work on really thinking about the development of that school-based element of it, in terms that we can progress the arrangements, as I say, ready for the new financial year. So the current scoping work that we're doing at the moment is really focusing on developing a range of school-based inclusion projects and programmes and interventions across the education system in Bristol. And this really is about how we improve the effectiveness in terms of our inclusion of children with SEND in our mainstream schools and settings. Very much thinking about how we meet those needs earlier through the school-based stages of the code of practice. And just really recognising through this programme that there's some excellent work going on across our mainstream schools, and we've got a wealth of knowledge and expertise sitting in our alternative providers and our special schools, that we need to think about how we can create frameworks to formally share that. So I've had a number of conversations with school leaders, and what I'm getting back from the sector as well is that they're really keen to explore more effective ways of meeting needs within a community, a locality. So thinking about how we've again got existing and historic arrangements of schools working together, but how we can use this programme and these pilot programmes and this funded programme to really think about working across a number of schools in a collaborative way, and really thinking about how the strengthening of that early identification and support, or targeting of particular interventions, can happen more at a community and a locality way, as well as it just being those sort of individual schools and settings. So the proposals in terms of the next stage is that bids would be invited from schools that really can demonstrate they can deliver that measurable and scalable change, and that will be right open to all schools and settings across the city. And we've tried to start thinking about how we would align that and articulate that to a really defined priority or themes, and they're certainly ones that we've talked about in the schools forum. So they're likely to sort of sit alongside areas such as the early intervention and support, and which I've already mentioned, emerging needs across the system. So I think we're particularly seeing, as we come out of COVID and since COVID started, that increase in areas of need, and particularly thinking around areas such as social, emotional, mental health, speech and language. Again, the feedback that we're getting from right through early years and through to that post-16 sector is that, you know, there is that rise in demand in particular areas. We're also interested in thinking about how we develop and build on workforce development and capability. So we've already rolled out quite a lot across phase 1 and 2 of the education transformation programme, but thinking about how we expand on that through this bids and fundings, and really again look at how we share expertise across the system to make sure that all our staff in mainstream settings are equipped to meet the range of needs that they are required to and they need to. So the other area that we want to focus this funding on again, we've talked about, is reducing suspensions, improving attendance for children with SEND. So again, continuing to move forward towards a more equitable, inclusive offer across our schools and settings, and reduce that disproportionate representation that we have in terms of exclusion of children with SEN. So we can start really articulating how, for this phase 3, that funding can be targeted on those school-based projects. So the proposals themselves will need to be able to demonstrate value for money. Again, that whole kind of community locality impact, and be sustainable. And I think that's the important thing with this phase 3. And we've talked about it, about the fact that, you know, that we can't keep looking at this as an annual injection of funding. It's got to be something that kind of brings about that long-term change across the system. So the idea is between now and April, which is obviously where we would want to start being able to allocate that funding, we'd set up a panel, and that panel will be drawn obviously from LA officers, and we'd want parent carer representation on that panel, and also school leaders and schools forum involvement as well. So that decision making will be based in a very open and transparent way. It will be based on clear criteria, and we also want to align those priority areas and mitigations within the DSG management plan, and also the new belonging strategy as well. So it's got a really clear place within that kind of system change. So in terms of next steps, the idea is that we bring back more of the detail. We've got the DSG management plan coming back to the March meeting, and we can bring more detail back to that. However, I'm really mindful that we need to get moving on this. We need to get that criteria set up. We need to get the information out to schools and settings so they can start thinking about whether or not they have the capability to bid, or joining a cluster of schools to do something new in particular areas. So it's going to be quite challenging to wait for March's forum. So what I propose is, if forum in agreement, is that as we work up the detail around this, that actually we circulate that prior to March's meeting, have a window that will be open for feedback, so that we can actually develop and you have sight of that as we develop that school-based programme. So I don't know whether, I'm certainly happy to take any questions on that, or whether in principle, if we move forward in that way, get the detail out to you, give you an opportunity to input, and then obviously I'll be asking for volunteers to be part of that panel in terms of assessing the bids and allocating the funding. We'd then move into, once April had started and that funding was out there, we'd then want to move into a cycle of monitoring and quality assurance through, again, bringing it back to Schools Forum, so that we really enable you to see the impact of the funding and the allocation of those bids.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison. It's pleasing to see what work has gone on so far, just in relation to that ring fencing of the funding and proposal around phase 3. Before I open up for comment on the feedback response, is there any questions specifically for Alison in relation to what we've just heard?
Just
Chris?
Yeah, just one, Alison. When you canvass or send out details to schools in that, will that be through your weekly newsletter then, so that I can tell people to look out for it?
Yeah, we'll do it in a few ways. I really want to make sure everybody sees that. So it will certainly go out through the bulletin. We also have I have a regular briefing session with heads. I might do an extraordinary one just to kind of bring the criteria and the ask alive a little bit. We'll also send it out through our phase chairs and talk about it at the Excellence for Schools group, which obviously has representation of leaders from across the city. So I'm hoping that we can get it out in a lot of different ways. I don't want any school or setting to miss out on the opportunity if they're sitting with good practice and expertise that they think they can scale up.
Okay, thank you.
Simon?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is this also going to include maintained nursery schools? Because we do have a high number of children with special needs. We were actually, in the Ofsted SEND report, recognised as a sector that was actually responding fast and well and inclusively. And I feel somehow not quite feeling that how we fit into this picture.
Mm-hmm. The idea, and this really is a question for forum, I suppose, and we may need to take it away to have a look at it. This is obviously high needs block funding that is funding this piece of work. And my preference would be that we'd look at it as a sector piece, and that we would be looking at some of that early identification, emerging needs. I mean, particularly Simon, talking to yourself and colleagues, speech and language in the early years, is a big concern at the moment. And it may be that we can use some of that to do some work and maybe bring health colleagues into it. So I'd like to be quite creative around that, but I'm also fully aware there are kind of rules and regulations about how funding is spent. So I don't know who best to, Sarah, to kind of really test this with and check this with, to make sure that we're working with her in the parameters, but I certainly would like to see it open to the full sector.
Yeah, of course. So
thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I think in terms of the proposal you're putting forward, Alison, it seems from what we know at this stage is something that obviously we want to be involved in and feedback and contribute towards. I guess without knowing a little bit more about the parameters around what we're discussing, it's a bit harder to then comment around what we can and can't feel is suitable in terms of that money. So I think your proposal is to effectively email us in advance with where you are at the stage before you're then going to go out to schools and get feedback directly from them in terms of the proposed bids. Is that right?
So in terms of the next steps, so the idea is that we'll kind of take the feedback we've had previously on this in terms of that next phase, look at where we need to target it in terms of those priorities, where the gaps are, and part of that is kind of data led as well in terms of what needs to be done. Certainly look at some of those areas that we'd want to strengthen through this in terms of the DSG management plan. I propose we send the draft around to this group for first comment and enable colleagues in the room to sort of input into that, and we'll keep a window open. Obviously, we've got rich information back already from the various different meetings from SENCO's, school leaders, and through groups like the SEN Partnership Group. So it's putting all of that together into a proposal that has a really clear criteria of what we're asking for. We've got to be very sharp and very targeted through this and make sure that schools really understand what it is they're bidding for and how to do that. Once we've agreed the principle, the framework in terms of the bid process, then we would want to establish the panel quite quickly and obviously get that information out to schools and give them a window of opportunity to bid for that funding, so that we can start with early projects, really start those early in April.
Okay, thank you, Alison. I think that's a very thorough explanation of next steps. So I'm just opening up to forum. From my perspective, I think that's a sensible solution because if given the timescale, we wouldn't be able to discuss it at our next meeting. So I would support the proposal of receiving an email, but I'm just going to pause there to see if there's anybody who would like to suggest something else. No. Okay, I think in terms of proposal, Alison, thank you. Yes, we would support that and then look forward to receiving it in detail and then being able to contribute and feedback.
Great, thank you, everyone.
And just as Alison's previous request, if there's anyone who's particularly interested in this and joining the panel, please give that some consideration as well. Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'll move us on then to the next item, which is one of the papers that you received, which is item 6, and that's the dedicated schools grant. So there's a number of things that we need to note and a number of things that we need to approve as well. So I think Travis, Angel, which one of you will be taking us through this one, please?
Should I do that, please, Angel? Yeah, okay. All right, so this item 6, looking at the level of the DSG for 22-23. So I won't spend too long introducing the paper, but so we have the indicative initial funding levels for 22-23, and we're asking that we formally agree the transfer between blocks as we agreed last time, the approach to the early years national funding formula, the allocations to the central school services block, and provide feedback and comment to us as officers for Cabinet and Council ahead of their budget meetings in the next few weeks. So the allocations in the paper are as were published and released by the SFL on 16th of December. And as we said, November's meeting gave agreement to the 0.5% transfer between schools block and high needs. And table 1 has detailed these allocations. I should probably point out that subsequent to the preparation of these papers, the SFA has announced further high needs funding, a release of another 325 million across the country, and Bristol's receiving another 2.691 of that. So the tables in this paper are a little bit out of date. So where we say 75.5 million of high needs, it's now 78.2 million, and the increase isn't 10.5%, it's nearer 13% now. So we could reflect that in the updated minutes to that, recognise that increase in the allocation. It also affects tables 2 and 3 in here as well, with the same increase in the allocation there as well. Other things to point out, central services is effectively, as always, in 2 components, and the historic element has been reduced by 20% again, as it has been for the last few years. But overall, there's a slight increase, slight decrease in that block, despite an increase to the ongoing element of their schools block, recovering in more detail on paper 7, but the funding in reflects the transfer of pupils from primary phase to secondary phase, reduction in primary pupils and an increase in secondary pupils. Early years, the 3 and 4 year old funding into the authorities unchanged, but 2-year-olds has increased by 21 pence, and we've got detail of the consultation with providers in this paper as well, where largely the result is that they wanted any increases to be passed on, which we're proposing for the 2-year-olds at 21p in full, and the rest of the funding basis to remain unchanged. And I think that was rather quick, but largely the content of that paper.
Great, thank you very much, Travis. Like you say, we talked about this in quite some detail at the last meeting, with the exception of early years, which we didn't get, well, the information wasn't available at the time, was it? Great, okay, so before I open up to take us through each of the decisions that we need to make, are there any particular comments on the paper or anything that anyone wants to ask Travis? No, okay. I'll take us through each item then. So we're noting the funding levels and the extra funding for high needs, which is great news. So in terms of the final transfer between the high needs block and the schools block, the 0.5, we supported that last meeting. I'm just going to open up to see if anybody would like to rescind their support of it, or they're happy to continue with the transfer. Okay, that all looks fine. Thank you very much, everyone. So the early years national funding formula rate. Now, Karina, who can vote on this one? Is it early years representatives, or is it all forum members?
Yeah, all school academy members are PVI, but we don't have a PVI rep here.
Okay, fine. So it's the majority of members then. Thank you. Okay. Right. So I'll start with the item D. I won't, so we've obviously got some feedback from the sector, and noticed that we didn't receive a huge number of responses. We've got, I think it was a small number of responses, but from what we have received, they also appear to be in support of the proposal. So if I just take the whole of item D as a whole, and just to see if 4 members are happy to support it as a whole, or the 4 items under D, or if anyone would like to take that separately. So I'll first assume that everyone's happy to do it as a whole, and just see, as we're on Zoom, if there's any specific objections to the proposal. No, okay, that's approved, thank you. Okay, and is there any specific feedback that anyone wants to give to pass over to Cabinet and Council in relation to the school budget for 22-23? I think specifically now that we've got the additional funding for high needs, it might be an interesting piece to understand a little bit more about how that might be utilised. going forward as part of the programme, perhaps, Alison, or if it will be there to support, you know, already cost pressures that are within the high needs block. So perhaps a little bit more around how that will be utilised would be helpful. Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, thank you, Travis. Now, are you taking us on to the next item then?
I think so. Yeah, unless yeah, I think I will. Okay, so item 7 provides more detail on the schools block element for 22-23, and again, this is seeking your formal approval now that we know the allocations and the application of the factors as we discussed last time into here, and again providing feedback or comment to members as appropriate over the coming cabinet and council meetings in the next few weeks. So at November's meeting, we considered the 0.5% transfer, reducing size of the block, the setting the MFG at 0.5%, the lump sum being retained at 125, targeting any additional funding into the additional education needs factors, and agreeing at £2 million for the growth fund. So table 1 in the report sets out the funding into the authority and the amount being allocated to the formula and the amount being transferred in for the growth fund. And of that, the money in is largely affected by pupil numbers. And as I said, the number of primary age pupils in the city is reduced in 22-23 from 35,800 to 35,300. And secondary is based now on 20,500, nearly 20,600. And that's up from 19,900 of the previous setting. So continuing with what we know, there's fewer primary age pupils and greater secondary age pupils. The rest of the report goes on to detail the allocation across the different factors, but I would point out, and in the appendices, hopefully they're large enough for people to see if you've got your own copies, but headlines, there's no change to the ORPI rate as we've agreed. We've been able to inflate the additional education needs, so deprivation, prior attainment, and English as an additional language by 11.4%, and we've retained the lump sum as requested. Next steps, next steps from this is that this will be submitted to the ESFA to pass their checks, but so far the indications are that it's all fine and good. So if we can agree this today, then we can let that go. Thank you very much.
Travis, can I just ask a quick question? Is there any further information since we looked at this in the autumn as to whether there is more likely or less likely to be a hard funding, national funding formula kind of, put in place next year?
There's been no further update based on the information that I've seen so far or been indicated to me in mailings that I received, but similarly there's been no indication that they've changed their mind on this either. I do know that the approach to funding of NNDR is being centralised within the ESFA for maintained schools as well as for academy schools. So it looks like the already intended progress is underway. So I suggest we are on track for what we know already, but there's been no further update, at least not I've seen.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Hayley?
Hi, it's just a question about growth fund. So is there a plan or is there an awareness of what's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? We know that when we're meeting together to look at pupils coming in from out of county, it's incredibly difficult to find a place in Bristol, and families are really struggling to find a secondary place in particular in Bristol. 70 places sounds like quite a lot, but is that planned in secondary or primary? In what areas of the city? Because particularly East and Central is very full.
The detail of 70 in the paper is a comment on the current situation where we've got one new and growing school, which we're allocating 70 through the new and growing schools process in the APT. Going forward, I guess you're talking about future years, then this is the current application of the current growth fund and also the current application of how the EFA treat growth. But as Simon's also asked about progress towards a hard funding formula, the treatment of growth funding going forwards and the hard NFF is also under review. It's currently based on a lagged process between the difference in pupil numbers in SOPA output areas on their calculation to us, whereas we apply our local growth fund policy as we agree at Forum. Going forwards, I think it's as much a question of place planning and how we target future resources if we can. But as things are, if we as a local authority require additional places and schools grow at our request, and we'd apply the growth fund as it applies, and we'd look at how we could then apply growth funding under any new arrangement as suggested by the ESFA. But it is an area they are reviewing. They don't have the answers to it yet. It's been a particularly tricky one for them because they know that lagged growth funding isn't particularly helpful to schools, and is one which we can avoid through the current arrangement. We can try and keep it real time. But I think I'm taking a long time to say I don't know the answer to your question, but yeah.
Shall I jump in on a bit more of the strategic side of things? Just in terms of when we're informed, so we only I find out the growth fund on an annual basis, so it's quite challenging to plan with finances against it for that long-term piece. But what we're doing is we're in the process of creating a place planning strategy that will take us through the next sort of 5 to 10 years. That started last term. We had to pause it just due to staff capacity, and we'll be picking that back up this term. And what that will do is pull together under the belonging strategy that wider strategic piece in terms of, you know, what are we doing in relation to specialist provision, what's that long-term piece, alternative provision, secondary, we've got falling role in primary, so all of that will be brought together. What we're doing at the moment is obviously responding, as you say, to that capacity issue, particularly at secondary school, which is obviously where a lot of that growth funding is being targeted, to look at annual expansion programmes with existing secondary schools in order to meet that demand going up. So and that's due to the fact that obviously we've got the delay in the new free school in East Central that was due to open in 2018, and the planning consent is still caught up, and then obviously the South secondary provision wasn't due to open in 2023. It's still on track to open in 2023, but obviously in temporary accommodation at the moment, and that's all being obviously managed by the DFE that sits outside of the local authority. So we're working very closely with them to make sure that there is the right space for that temporary accommodation. What I understand is that the March Schools Forum is where we're going to look in more detail at that place planning as well, so we'll be able to bring that progress update to that, but obviously the current allocation of the funding is also going through Cabinet in terms of specialist provision and the allocation against the Year 7 provision as well, so that goes through on Tuesday.
Great, thank you very much, Alison. And I was just about to comment on the place planning paper coming to March, so thank you. You've covered that one for us. That's great. Okay, is there any more questions to Travis in relation to the paper?
Well, it was more a question actually to the new secondary school in East Central and the planning problems. I mean, do we know what they are? Because it doesn't seem to be problems with planning other things down in that area, which are controversial, which get through, but finding a place for children to go to school seems to be more of a problem with planning. I don't quite understand how any of this is working.
Yeah, so just to that, Simon, so the school itself is part of that wider, and I don't know how close, but that wider Silverthorne Lane development that's quite a complex and extensive development. So obviously the planning for all of that started in 2016. It's taken quite a while to get planning consent from a local perspective, and then that went through last summer. When that went through, there was an objection from the Environmental Agency in relation to potential flood risk. So what happened was that planning consent got called in by the Secretary of State and has been sitting in that space in terms of making a decision. So again, kind of that's running at a different timescale and agenda to anything we can control locally. The report by the Secretary of State was due in the summer. That was then pushed back to November. It's then been pushed back to this year. So again, we and families, planners, contractors, everybody's waiting for this report to be published. When it is published, there will be a period where it can be kind of challenged, judicial review, that sort of thing, and that so that it's the minute it's published isn't when we can move forward with it. But what we're unable to do is open in temporary accommodation until obviously that absolute planning consent comes through.
Great, thank you, Alison. I know this is a very complex one, hasn't it? Okay, and out of our control largely. Okay, so can't see anyone else's hands up in terms of comments on the paper. Okay, thank you very much, Travis, for taking us through that one. So in terms of what we need to approve, so we discussed the rates in detail at the last meeting, and also we had the subgroup who also looked at it in terms of impact in a bit more detail than we were able to in the meeting. So I think we were largely in support of the rates that were proposed. So I'm just going to pause there and just see if there's any objections to the rates that are proposed in the paper. No. Okay. And I think we've all provided some feedback in relation to some of the content of the paper. So unless there's anything anyone else would like to say, I will move us on to the next item. Okay, that's all approved. Thank you very much, Travis. I think the point about the place planning is one that's valid in relation to primary and secondary pupil numbers going forward. So definitely be interested in seeing the place planning paper at the next meeting. Thank you very much. Okay, so item 8 on the agenda is the de-delegation. So if you remember from the last meeting, there are a number of items that were approved. So this is for our Maintain School Forum members. There was a number of items that were approved, and then there were a couple. One was the employee and premises insurance, and that was an item to take away to clarify a bit more information about that one. So I'll pass over to officers to discuss that one. And then the second item was around educational psychology, where we had an equal measure of support and against. So the deciding vote was with myself. I'm going to open that one up again to a vote and see if the movement has changed since then. But first of all, the employee and premises insurance, who is going to take us through that particular item? Is that yourself, Alison? Or...
I don't think it was me, actually. No, I've looked at colleagues.
I think it's Travis.
I hope not, but do you know if Paul's joining us for this, Angel?
Sorry?
No, Paul is not, yeah.
It looks like we were having a colleague joining to go through this.
Okay. It looks like we might not be able to carry on with that item then, because I know there were some particular concerns, and apologies who raised it at the previous meeting, but there was particular concerns around the insurance, I think, from the primary Maintain colleagues as opposed to the secondary ones.
Yeah, it was myself. I raised it really with regards to the cost, why it was, £31.05 for, should we say, the local authority insurance, and I think the RPA is about £20, something like that. And the answer that I had back originally was that the RPA wouldn't necessarily cover what we needed to cover, and that was the requirement to understand what was missing from RPA that was in the insurance from the local authority, and is it £10 worth?
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you for clarifying that one.
Actually, I just had a message from Paul. I'm trying to send him a link.
Sarah, is it worthwhile moving forward and then coming back if Paul can join us? Can we go to the next item and come back?
Yeah, good plan. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Denise. Okay, well, I'll move us on then to the educational psychology point, because that was, we had 2 members in support of the dedelegation and 2 members against it. And then the deciding vote was with myself, but I decided to take that one away specifically because it was an area that I'm familiar with and wanted to understand a little bit more about it. So I have got some feedback from Alison, so thank you very much, Alison. In terms of what that looked like from Alison, you mentioned specifically when consulting with schools how much SENCOs valued the work of the educational psychologist team that supports the Bristol maintained schools, and in relation to all the other areas that they're able to support with. So I am going to open it back up to members who are able to vote. So this is maintained primary members, just to see if there's been any movement in relation to supporting that. If there hasn't, then I will make the deciding vote. But if I could open up then to maintain primaries, just to confirm, if you are in support of the dedelegation, please raise your hand. Okay, so we've got 2 in support. Thank you. Okay, and if you are against, please raise your hand. Okay, Cedric. Okay, so I think now we are looking at a 2-1 split in favour, so we are supportive of the delegation.
Sorry, Sarah, I think Chris was voting against.
Chris as well, yeah. Chris and me.
Ah, sorry,
There's
Chris, I didn't
2-2.
see your hand then, sorry.
Yeah.
2-2, okay. So the deciding vote sits with me, and based on the evidence provided by Alison, I will support the dedelegation for this academic year. But I think there's some feedback that other members have put forward, Alison, that we need to give due consideration about the service that's provided and making sure it's value for money. And if Chris and Cedric want to pick that up separately to detail their specific concerns and how we can address those, can we take that as an action for outside this meeting, please?
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask really what I want to understand is what will schools be getting for that money?
Yeah, so I will, we can follow up with the detail there, and again, make sure that you've got transparency of that. That's no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, now do we have our insurance colleague here able to take us through? Or shall I move us on to the next item?
He was.
I am here. Yeah, I am here.
Okay, that's good.
Perfect. So we're going
over to you. Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to talk through the dedelegation of finance in respect of the insurance for the preceding year and for the next 3 years, as we're going out on the basis of a 3-year agreement with the optional extension to extend. So I understand from previous correspondence regarding this that there is interest in respect of joining the RPA or another similar insurance arrangements, potentially schools seeking that directly. So what I've done is I provided a snapshot with finance colleagues around the benefits and the considerations for joining a separate scheme. I believe that's obviously been shared previously with everyone on the call. So I'll just go through a few of the highlights from that. Primarily the RPA, because I know that's one that's gained the most interest from those on the call. The RPA doesn't include some key covers such as engineering inspection services and motor insurance. So if any schools do have, they are legally required services and insurances. So that's one consideration to take if the decision was made not to de-delegate in respect of insurance. Further to that, the RPA would work in a slightly separate way, in that it would deal with schools directly. So that at the moment you currently benefit from the insurance team and risk team liaising with schools in respect of claims and litigation incidents. In a situation where you would join the RPA directly, we would either need to come to an agreement around funding a fee-based service for the risk and insurance team to pick up those incidents, or whether we would need to schools to pick up that directly, and that would potentially add a burden in respect of admin in respect of those incidents. Is there any further specific queries? I'm conscious I could go through all the covers, but I'm not sure on how we're doing for time, or whether there was specific queries that I could perhaps pick up in light of the document being shared.
Thank you, Paul. I think you may have missed the opening question, but it was in effect the RPA is a certain amount per pupil, but the dedelegation is about £10 more. I think you mentioned, Chris. So it's more around the differences between the two. But I think you've covered some of those, haven't you? So, Chris, what would you like to come in here?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, Paul. It's more to do with, and as you say, it was outlined about the engineering insurance and motor insurance, which I would have said were quite remote usage within in a primary school and that kind of stuff. And I was on a call with the DFE, and they were explaining how local authorities were taking up RPA as a local authority wide scheme, if you like. So it wasn't as though individual schools wanted to sign up for themselves. It was the local authority were taking it, should we say, like an umbrella scheme. And then in a similar way to the scheme here, it was then offered out to all schools within that local authority. Is that not the case? Have I misunderstood that?
That could be the case at some local authorities. A review was done last year by the incumbent risk and insurance manager at the time, who was of the opinion that the approach would be to recommend going out for the future cover of schools via commercial insurance rather than through the RPA at this stage. So that may be the case. Other authorities have favoured going with an RPA approach, but we're favouring going with the insurance-based approach at this stage.
Right. Okay. So just as another thing, then, where I mentioned about the engineering insurance and you say the motor insurance, are in effect we being over-insured then, because none of those would be in place in any of the schools that I'm in.
Sorry, Paul, just bear with me. I know we're doing quite well for time, but I'm just conscious we don't want to spend a thing. But you've raised a very valid point, Chris, and I think the RPA is an option now for local authorities to opt into for schools. So if Bristol are proposing that actually that's not a solution for them and they want to have a commercial provider, then that's obviously something that's worth us being aware of. Denise, you've got your hand up, so I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask Paul from a value for money perspective, Paul, if we can just confirm that it isn't a better value for money solution for the council to operate or to at least explore the RPA route. It would still be dedelegation, but it may mean a reduction in costs. So I think we should just at least explore that before we commit to a 3-year tender as an alternative. Yeah, I was thinking that would probably be a good way forward.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We've left the tender. We notified tenderers that we are still reviewing the position in respect of cover for educational properties and educational liabilities. So we've left the flexibility in the tender in relation to that to explore that further.
Yeah, so maybe it's the agreement is whether you de-delegate or not, but if you do de-delegate, then we ensure that we seek the most value for money option and explore the RPA as part of that process.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Denise. That sounds like a very helpful solution. So in terms of those able to vote, with Chris, does that now answer your queries, your questions?
Well, it gives it an open, if you like, situation where everything is being considered, and if at the end of it the value for money is to go with a commercial insurance thing, then all well and good. I just didn't want us, given the fact it was up for renewal now, to miss the opportunity not only going to a different insurance provider, but also making some substantial savings for schools potentially. So yeah, I'm happy to vote in favour of de-delegation on the proviso what Denise has just mentioned.
Excellent, thank you. And can I get confirmation that the others do not object and would support that one? So please raise your hand if you object to that revised approach. Okay, I think that one's all approved. Thank you very much.
Sarah, whilst we're here, can I just ask one quick question? It's not about anything in particular. It's about the trade union fund that obviously we pay into. Would somebody be able to let me know how schools access that? Because I've tried to email various areas and I'm having no success.
No problem. Yeah, we can take that one away as an action. Alison, please. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that then takes us on to the next item, which is the budget monitor, which is item 9. And Angel, I think you're going to take us through the highlights. So this is the next update that we received for period 8, isn't it, to November. So over to you, please, in terms of highlights in the paper. It's for us to note and comment.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And this is just give you an oversight of where we are in terms of DSG budget performance as at November 2021, P8. So we've had a carry forward deficit from the previous financial year was £10 million, as we all know. And this year, as at November, the deficit has gone up to 16.7 million, as illustrated in table 1 in the page 2 of the report. The main driver again is from the demand in the high needs block, high needs top up placements, and also some pressure in early years SEN, as per previous months really. This has given us the latest forecast position at the end of this year is about 16.7 million. So the cumulative forecast at the end of this financial year could reach 26.7 million. And that's for the group to note. And if you've got any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very quick step through the paper. We've also got a little bit more detail in terms of the variance for each block. So thank you for highlighting that the majority of that movement is in high needs. It's obviously continues to be a considerable amount of money in relation to the dedicated schools grant, hence why I know we've got a number of strategies in the background, and it's good to see where we are in terms of the current budget. Has anyone got any? So Alison, we are going to be receiving a copy of the DSG management plan at the next meeting in terms of steps in trying to bring the deficit down.
Yeah, next iteration, updated iteration comes back in March, and obviously the detail that you'll be sent around the education transformation programme, the phase 3, which is aligned to the DSG management plan, and really to the criterion framework will also be to respond to where we're seeing that real pressure in the system. So between those two pieces of work and documents, we start seeing you know, how we're looking to address this and additional measures.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any Simon, did you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, if I could just ask something, I think this is probably the best place to ask it really, rather than adding an extra item on the agenda. There's been some kind of sketchy information in the press over recent days around local authorities' powers to recoup money from local authority schools. I guess, can we get some assurances that that is not going to be the case in the coming financial year, particularly if it's a case of simply trying to redress a significant deficit?
Alison, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, I'm not aware of what's gone out in the press.
Right.
Because I'd be quite interested, Simon, if you're happy to send me some links.
Yeah, I will do. In summary, yeah, it's saying how local authorities can essentially claw back money from local authority schools. Like I say, it is sketchy, and it's only, I think it was yesterday actually that it came out. But I just wanted to kind of raise it really as a matter of concern, because obviously, as everyone's looking at finalising budgets and so on, yeah, want to kind of register the concern really.
Yeah, okay, I'll be interested. I'll have a look and
I'll see if I'll fire it on to you. That's no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Thanks, Simon.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say, Simon Allison, is that to do with the grant that they're looking to take away from local authorities that currently fund certain services, if you like, that we had to complete a survey on and feedback on not long ago?
Oh, it might be related, yeah, to the brokerage grant for the school improvement for maintained schools. It could be the consultation was published 2 days ago. So that may be related to that, Simon, and that's about funding directly from the DFE to local authorities as part of that proposal of the brokerage grant. The proposal is that that is reduced and that over the next 2 years and taken away from local authorities. So it could be related to that. So that's about the funding into the local authority, not clawing back funding from schools that's already been allocated.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back and double check. Like I say, I'm really appreciative that it was sort of a sketchy sort of details at this stage, but with Schools Forum being right now, it seems silly not to kind of at least raise the concern.
No, thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
And I think we've got that link there, so thank you for sending that over.
If I may quickly add, Sarah, I think what Simon is referring to is the use of balance control mechanism. Could that have significant surpluses? I'm not sure whether Bristol has applied that mechanism in the last few years. It's always part of the report at the end of the financial year. I remember doing one mid last calendar year. So it's about whether we want to introduce the pass is there to control surplus balances of maintained schools. So the question is whether whether we want to reactivate that mechanism again. It's about primary and secondary maintained schools having significant balances over an agreed threshold. And I think it's also applicable to academies as well, but that is handled by the ESFA, not by the council.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. It looks like it is likely to be something along those lines. And, you know, it's been an interesting few financial years in relation to school balances with COVID and getting funding, lots of expenditure. And there's been quite a, dips in terms of financial position. So, and we'll take that one away and come back. But thank you for raising it, Simon. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. There were so many different comments being made, and I think I wanted to touch on all of them. And I think the point that was made about, I just had a quick look at that article, and actually the explanation that you did give, Abby, was kind of around that. I don't know whether or not I can tell you now, that's not something that we would be looking back to claw back anything from any schools who are going to be, unless they are in surplus, but I don't doubt it very much. I really wanted to just stress the point about and the real urgency for us in which we have to really address the growing deficit within the DSG. I'm really keen for us to actually have for the Schools Forum to have quite a robust discussion around the DSG management plan when you meet again in March, because this is quite serious, and we really need to manage it because we don't have any real means of escape on this one. It's something that we all have to take quite not only just seriously, but yeah, the numbers are eye-watering. And as you know, this week we put out the papers to agree the budget for the local authority, in which we're having to make an additional savings of around £19.5 million. So compounded with the DSG budget, it's not a good picture, but hopefully the management plan will give us some help in getting it down. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate the point that I'm taking it extremely seriously. I'm not saying that you're not, but it would be great if maybe at the next meeting you set aside some time to really have a robust discussion on that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I absolutely agree with you in terms of the importance of this growing deficit, and I know other members of the forum completely agree that it's something that we want to support and really give you some robust feedback and, you know, support in relation to how we manage it and get it down. I might suggest that we perhaps, of course, give it some time at forum, but also perhaps set up a smaller working group to specifically look at the plan in a bit more detail, with a cross section of members, which then maybe we'll be able to, you know, get into it in a little bit more detail, which is always harder when there's such a big group of people in a meeting. So I think we'll take that one away and see if there's a smaller group that can look at the plan, and then we can do a wider discussion as forum members as well. But I think we recognise that it's a very large deficit, and it's also now, you know, the regulations have changed in terms of where that sits within the council's remit as well. So thank you for raising that. We'll definitely take it seriously and provide as much support and feedback as we can.
Thank you.
Sarah, can I just add, we've also got we're continuing with the task and finish groups for the early years element of that, and obviously the high needs block as well, and that will be for part of that feedback loop for the March meeting as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Alison. Okay, Aileen.
Hi, thanks again. I just have a question about 4.4. This is about the closure of 3 schools and the opening of a new school. Is the reason for the variance because the local authority retains the deficit and the academy retains a surplus when schools close and change? And then I've got 2 questions about the high needs block. The top up to resource bases has increased, and in the past we've had issues with money going into resource bases that have been empty. So is there can we have some clarity on whether the spaces have been filled or if the local authority is paying empty spaces? This is a historic issue with overpayment. And then the final question, and I don't think there's a quick answer to this one, but there's a considerable difference in the special schools, the amounts in the funding and the outturn. And is there a quick explanation for forum as to why that's such a big difference?
Okay, thank you, Aileen. So should we take the first one about the closure point, the 4.4? Angel or Travis, did you want to, or Abby?
Shall I do that one, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we've seen in the previous paper that we have to allocate the schools block in full every year, and that's what we did last year with those schools being open. The cabinet decision to close those schools hadn't been made at that point yet, so they were fully funded for a whole 12 months as we're required to, and they closed at the end of August, so we literally ceased paying them money, and so they had five months of their 12 months allocation. But then we opened a new school, we opened Willow Park instead, which now needed 7 months, which was not in the original consideration. So with advice from the SFA, we work out a new allocation for the new successor school, so effectively we take back 7 months funding from those 3 closed ones because they're closed, they're gone, which creates an underspend, and then we reallocate. And if we ended up overspending, we would have overspent it as well. But the new school opened partway through the year outside of the process, so we effectively recycle that closed money into that. So this is a net result of those 2 on there.
Lovely, thank you, Travis. Okay, and then the other couple of points about resource-based and special schools. So I think the resource-based one is probably for yourself, Alison.
Yeah, I can come in on those. So in terms of capacity, the rise in cost, it's very much needs led, so it's very much related to specific children, young people, and it's the same really for the special schools. So what we've seen, what's driving that increased cost is very much through that top up funding piece as opposed to the actual place allocation piece. So we're not sort of funding lots of empty spaces in a way that I know that we did previously. So what we've seen is certainly from the November top up panel and funding process, which obviously is feeding into these figures, a significant increase in terms of requests that were accepted. So we've seen that increase in need right the way through the system, but particularly we saw it at primary and obviously at special. And then in terms of the actual cost, the complexity of need and the request for funding, additional complexity of need has driven those costs up as well. So it's very much linked to individual child-led funding increases as opposed to sort of establishment increases, I suppose. That answers both of those, I hope.
Thank you. Yes, that's really helpful. I just wonder if consideration for next year's budget, in terms of if it's increased that much this year, is it not likely to do the same again, considering that the problems that we've encountered this year are not going to go away? Has that been considered when considering budgets for next year?
So some of that forecasting has been worked into next year's budget as well. And so the piece of work that we're focused on at the moment is really thinking about those mitigations and those assumptions around those mitigations, because it's an example of why we've got looking at the school-based proposals, is that what we need to do is we need to make sure the system works effectively from end to end. Now there is potentially, in sort of talking to colleagues in other authorities, very much a sort of COVID response to a lot of this as young people, very much back into schools and settings. So we're anticipating that doesn't increase at the rate that we're seeing at the moment, and certainly in terms of where we're seeing those spikes compared to previous years, we do have anomalies within that. So we have to factor that in as well, rather than just thinking that we're going to continue at this rate of increase with our forecast.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for the report, Angel. And I think we'll anticipate, as Councillor Craig suggested, consideration and some robust feedback to the DSG management plan when it comes to our next meeting. So if we can give that some thought in advance when we receive the papers, or if you're in those two subgroups, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, then to our final item, which is the financial regulations for maintained schools. Now, this has been a comprehensive review, hasn't it, Abby? So we have got the full pack of regulations for us to consider, but you've summarised the specific changes that are being proposed. So I will hand over to you in terms of giving us a bit of background to the regulations themselves and some of the key items you're proposing that we bring in or that we change. And then just as a reminder, this will then be voted on by maintained school members. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. A quick one. The financial regulation is the tool by which the scheme for financing schools, which the forum approved at its last meeting, is expanded upon and is made real and specific to schools with delegated budgets, and we call them maintained schools. So it expands because the scheme for financing school is a national document and is standardized across several local authorities. So if you look at our scheme in Bristol as compared to other local authority scheme, is broadly very similar, and that is the way the department wanted it. But we are also allowed to sort of expand on those regulations, especially bearing in mind our own council financial regulation as well. So what we've done is to sort of bridge that gap between a kind of more standardized document and a document that school can use, in day-to-day financial management. So the forum is, as part of good practice, we are sharing the regulation with the forum for their views and comment on the document. And because of the size of the document, of this proposed document now, it's significantly bigger than than the previous regulation, which was last reviewed in 2015. We sort of put in place not just regulation itself, but examples, annexures, which are like templates, models, questions and answers, charts that school can use in making their decision about a lot of things. We've added it to this, and that has made it to be significantly, larger than the previous one. I'm mindful of the time that members have had to really look at this. We think it is necessary to give you more time to look at it properly, read the document properly, and express your views and comment through the clerk to us by the end of the month, 27th of January 2022. So as promised at the last Schools Forum meeting, we hope that the regulation, once it's completed, will take effect from 1st April 2022, the same date as the scheme for financing schools. So in a nutshell, what we try to do is to really look at the regulation, bearing in mind what has happened between 2015 and now, bearing in mind the changes that we've made to the scheme for financing schools, the practices that have evolved between 2015 and now, and everything has been put together in formulating the new regs. I don't want to go through each of the individual items in there. The changes, the areas that have been significantly rewritten are summarized in Appendix A to the report. And as I've said earlier, we've also added some annexures to the report, which are more like model documents, model procedures that schools can use, sample of budget monitors and things like that. Further explanation of some technical accounting issues like leases and capital expenditure. So we've added all of that, to the back end of the document. Unless members have any specific questions, and also can I quickly add that I've got commitment that the council hopes to be reviewing these regs on a regular basis, as at when needed, but at least once every 3 years. And also when other documents that underpins this financial regulation changes significantly, we will expect that the regs will also change significantly. We won't have to wait for another 7 years before we do another revision of this nature. So unless you have any specific questions to ask at this point in time, if you have anything, if you've read it, that's fantastic. You can feed back to us or through the clerk to us. You have till 27th of January, to let us have your comments and views on the financial regulation.
Great, thank you very much, Abby, for taking us through that and the background to them. Just a couple of quick questions before I open up. So I think I mistakenly said that we would need to vote on it, but we don't actually, do we? They're just for reference. Yeah, so apologies for that. It's just for comment. They will be implemented from the 1st of April. And the second one is around how will you actually communicate these updated regulations to maintain schools specifically, because it does sound like they are considerably larger than they were previously.
A copy of it will be on the council's website and the source, and we'll hope to use the various channels. Principally, we'll hope to use Alison's weekly bulletin as one of the channels by which this will be communicated to schools. And also we have contact of most business managers anyway, so we'll probably alert them to the fact that it's now been published and it's available, for comment and use.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Are there any initial comments on the paper? Chris?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had time to read the paper. Obviously, 103 pages is quite a considerable thing. It's just a couple of questions or a couple of things to point out. The previous version of the current, should we say, version of financial regulations for schools and delegated budgets, I have is July 17, not 2015. Am I looking at the right one at the moment, Abby?
I think you might be referring to the scheme for financing schools. the scheme that because the reg that I updated is 2015 and the scheme was 2017.
Financial regulations for schools with delegated budgets. July 2017, I've got a copy. Oh, that's what we've been working to. So that's one thing. The second thing, are you looking for just feedback from forum members, or will this go out to schools to provide feedback?
It will be made available widely to the school community. Yes, it will be good to have as wider enough feedback as possible. It will help shape, the final document, when that happens. So there's no problem doing that.
Can I just make a suggestion then? That could we possibly extend the deadline for responses by about a week? The reason being that obviously schools at the moment are in the throes of doing their Q3 outturns, and obviously getting SFVS in preparation for beginning of next month. So from time-wise, if we want to get as big a feedback as possible, if we could have give it at least to the first week in February, I think we would get potentially more responses.
That's doable. I can see Dennis is nodding her head, so I don't see any problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
Right then, thank you very much. I think what we're probably saying is that because it hasn't been reviewed for a while, some of these are just going to be regulations that need to be adopted and not necessarily able to seek feedback on in terms of amendments or anything. But nonetheless, it's good to share those to see what the impact would be once they're implemented, and also to get some other feedback too. So if we're able to do that, Abby, Denise, thank you very much. That would be very helpful. Has anyone got any other comments on it? Nope. Okay, but we've got, as we've just talked about, a number of weeks of feedback for those of you who are able to review and comment. That'd be very helpful. Okay, so that takes us through to the main items on the agenda. Are there any other business from anyone?
Hi, Sarah. Sorry, can I jump in? Just in terms of drumming up interest in our task and finish groups that I mentioned earlier, a couple of members who have now stepped down from their role were members of the task and finish group. So Aileen did a sterling job representing the forum at the last, particularly the high needs block. I think we have more on the early years, but we certainly would welcome a few more, particularly the conversation we've just had, a few more members joining that session. So if I ask Karina to circulate dates, maybe, and yeah, as I say, it would be really good to get more forum members looking at some of that detail, and we do go into it in quite a bit of detail in terms of demands, the data sitting behind that, and then the assumptions that we're working on.
Absolutely, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, anything from anyone else? Okay, so we've got the items in relation to future meetings. We've got 3 more for this academic year, and we'll populate those for the next meeting, but we will have place planning at the next one, as well as the DSG management plan. So I think that brings our meeting to a close. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you again at the next meeting. Thank you.